Welcome back to my channel. You're watching Four Corners of the Page. Now today I want to do my first book review, but it's not quite a book review really. It's more of a discussion and light analysis of a story that I have really come to enjoy the last year, which is The Wandering Inn by Pirate Abba. Forgive me if I refer to Pirate Abba accidentally as a woman or she or her. We don't know who Pirate Abba is. They're completely an anonymous author who's been publishing this story as a web serial for the last, I think, 8 or 9 years. The thing that you will find with The Wandering Inn, what draws people to it initially, is its scope. Now, The Wandering Inn, I believe at this stage, is about 13 million or 14 million words long. If you were to print I did this math, if you print The Wandering Inn out as a CVS receipt in that tiny little font size and that kind of size all the way down, the continuous stream of receipt would be about 3 miles long. It is the length of about 9 A Song of Ice and Fire series as it currently stands. So take the Game of Thrones box sets and then stack 9 of those on top of each other and you've got The Wandering Inn. But I can't quite figure out, beyond the sense of size that first drew me to this story, why it's so popular and why I like it so much, and I really do. You also find a wonderful community online celebrating this story. There is really something special there. But when you just look at a page of The Wandering Inn, you just kind of scroll down on your Kindle and you stop at a certain point, there doesn't seem to be initially, and forgive me fans for saying this, there doesn't seem to be anything particularly special going on any particular page. The prose is functional and understandable. I think there's more to it, which I'll get to in a second, but it doesn't pop off the page in the same way Robin Hobb does or Guy Gavriel Kay does. The characters are kind of infamous in that first volume for being a bit surly and unenjoyable, and I would dispute that. But that's the reputation they have. And especially in that first volume, the world doesn't seem to be something, and again, forgive me for saying this, entirely special, original, new. It feels like a portal fantasy, which is what it is. If you've never heard of The Wandering Inn, the story is basically you have this character called Erin Solstice, who finds herself suddenly, I think she goes to have a shower or something like that, and she ends up suddenly in the world of The Wandering Inn. And the first couple of volumes are really her story and her trying to survive in this new environment that she's never had to contend with before. And there's a lit RPG element, I should say, to The Wandering Inn as well, where characters collect levels and can gain different classes and things like that. It's got that real lit RPG sense to it, and it is kind of one of the flagship lit RPGs in the space. But again, the point of this video is really me trying to articulate to myself, why do I love this series so much? Because I really do. I started it in March last year. Thinking I'd give it a go because I was intrigued by the size, if I'm honest. And I'm now on volume 5, which is about 5,000 pages in. Now, 5,000 pages for The Wandering Inn is a bit of a drop in the ocean because we're currently up to volume 10. Again, that's about 14 million words in. So I'm not really anywhere close to completing it. I think I'm probably about 10 or 15% through the story as a whole. But I am loving it. And I know that I am going to catch up despite being on such a busy schedule. And I've been trying to work out why. And this video, not to ramble on too much, I do want this to be a slightly shorter video than last time, is an articulation of why I love this series so much and why I would, to be honest, recommend it to anyone who loves reading. It seems like an arduous undertaking, but it's not. It's really not. And I want more people to read and share it with me. And I'm so happy I found this series and this community and an author who's so open and upfront, despite being anonymous, with their process, that I just want to keep going with it. So the first reason I would say that I think The Wandering Inn is really a superb piece of fantasy storytelling is its scale. And I don't mean the size, I don't mean the raw word count, because if you have a story that's 14 million words long and it's 14 million janky, dodgy, boring, dull, dry words, it's not going to be a good story. But that's not what this feels like, and that's not what I mean by the scale of The Wandering Inn. What I mean by the scale of The Wandering Inn is that sense of freedom and exploration and openness that I get. It almost feels like when you start a new open world RPG video game, think Oblivion, Skyrim, The Witcher, whatever, what have you, or something older, big MMO like World of Warcraft or RuneScape, and you first get into that world and you look around you and you kind of realize that anything is possible. You can go anywhere, you can do anything. It feels like a summer's day when you're a kid and you're on vacation and you wake up and you walk out the house, and if you're in Scotland it's probably raining, but if you're not in Scotland it's probably a nice sunny day and you can walk out and you just know, you don't know what you're going to do with your day, you don't know what friends are available, you don't know what's going to happen later, but there's just that sense of anything could happen. And I think The Wandering Inn, to be honest, is the best articulation of that feeling that I've ever encountered. There are plot threads, there are arcs, the story is not meandering, the story is not aimless, But there is also a sense, because of the word count, that Pirate Abba can really let her world breathe and explore and just do whatever they like. They don't feel like they have to be continuously barreling towards the end of a sequence. And for that reason, it just feels joyful. There's a section, very light spoilers here, there's a section in one of the volumes where Pirate Abba takes 300, 400 pages and says, okay, I want to tell a kind of Harry Potter-like story now set at a wizard's academy. Or I'm going to take 200, 300 words, and this character that I've been mentioning on the periphery, through hearsay and muttering and rumours, I'm going to spend the first 300 pages of this book talking about what they're doing over here. And in any other book series, that would feel a bit wonky. You'd want to get back into that action. You want to come back to the characters you know and love. But not so much here. There's a real emphasis on just enjoying the world and really soaking in it and not knowing what story Pirate Abba is going to take you to next. And you don't quite know when you're going to get back to those main characters, but that's okay because we will catch up with them eventually. And for this reason, I've seen The Wandering Inn kind of referred to as similar to something like a soap opera, like Coronation Street or EastEnders or something like that, or whatever the American equivalent is. But I don't think that's quite fair. Because what you have in something like Coronation Street is you have about 7 different plot lines and you get about 2 or 3 minutes with each plot line in a 30-minute episode. And that's not what happens here. You will spend 50, 100, 200 pages with a set of characters before we go on to the next. And for that reason, it doesn't feel jarring, it doesn't feel broken, and you don't lose interest. I would actually say that there's no plot line in The Wandering Inn that has felt stale or wrung out or uninspired. There's obviously some that feel more traditional than others, and there's some that feel more to my taste than others. But I don't think there's any that's just felt like pandering, or Pirate Abba has woken up that day and said, oh, I need to get something out at their absolutely humongous pace. That would be forgivable, but that isn't what happens here. And it's that sense of open freedom to The Wandering Inn that I think makes it a very enjoyable read. The second one that I want to talk about is the tone. Now, I said earlier that when you look at a page of The Wandering Inn, it feels pretty, I don't want to say nothing-y, I don't want to say not special, but unremarkable might be your first impression. And again, I don't think that's fair. It is not the most remarkable piece of prose you'll ever read. And to be honest, when Pirate Abba is writing 3,000 words a week, that's not really their goal. I think they've said this in one of their interviews as well. This is not something that is what they focus on as a skill. I think the prose is great, actually, but what it is it's chatty, it's conversational. I think the closest approximation would be more like something like Stephen King, who when you just read, you just get into the flow of that writing style and you find yourself just chewing up the pages. And that's what I feel The Wandering Inn is like in its writing style. I think it's a mistake to call it unremarkable. I think it's more just that this author is very good at drawing you in. And although there are moments of, I would say, kind of poetic brilliance in The Wandering Inn, there are chapters here and there where you do stop and you go, wow, the main drive of this narrative in terms of its tone is to just tell you a story. It feels like you're sitting around a campfire and someone is giving you that story. And sometimes things do get tense and the language does become luscious and wonderful. But for the most part, it's like someone telling you a story. And I think that sense of scale and exploration really feeds in nicely with that narrative decision that Pirate Abba has made. So yeah, it doesn't feel unedited. It feels like somebody speaking to you, which is what I've got written down over there. And I would say that's played the way to say it. It feels like someone's having this chat with you, this conversation. And that kind of continues in the comments. If you ever look at The Wandering Inn's actual website, and you can read this whole thing for free online, I should say. You can buy it on Kindle. There's a fantastic, superb audible narration. I've been mainly reading it on Kindle, which I know some people find is heretical, because apparently the audible narration by Andrea Parsnell, her name is just fantastic. But it feels like somebody speaking to you, and I could see why the audible would be so successful, even if it was a less successful narrator doing it, because that's the tone that is struck there. And the third thing I would say with The Wandering Inn is there is actually some thematic depth to it. And again, if the story was just a story for enjoyment's sake, there's nothing wrong with that. I would never say there's anything wrong with that, but the more I think about The Wandering Inn, the more I realise that there are themes that are continuously explored and developing, cropping up as the story continues. One thing, and I did my master's degree in international education, so one thing that I'm really passionate about is intercultural communication and intercultural competence. and identifying the cultures that we're unfamiliar with and how to successfully explore those and interact with those. And there's a lot of that in The Wandering Inn. It really ticks a box that I'm looking for. That you have these sometimes traditional high fantasy races, and sometimes you have these entirely original races that are quite frankly brilliant. The Pirate Abba explores, and watching the characters interact and trying to struggle to understand those other characters that often don't feel very humanoid or human-like. The Antinium in book 1, with not being a spoiler, is a very good example of this. There's obviously that theme of found family, and constructing a friendship group when you initially feel so isolated, which is a very common theme, but it's also very appealing here. And the last one I would probably say, and one that's constantly at the forefront of the series so far, is identity. I think Pirate Abba is very good at playing with this lit RPG concept of levels. Because normally, what seems to happen in lit RPG, and forgive me, there's definitely people who've read more of it than I have, is the leveling is seen as a sense of empowerment. You go from level 5 to level 6, you get stronger, you get better. But it's a double-edged sword in The Wandering Inn, which is something I really appreciate. And this, I probably won't say that because it gets into spoilers, but there's this open conversation as to, is leveling a good thing, or does it lock us into roles that we don't want? Are these levels actually limiting rather than liberating? Which I think is a really interesting take on this lit RPG space. There's characters who kind of realize, oh, maybe I've gone the wrong way here, and I can't undo what I've done because this is the role that I have established for myself, or even worse, the role that some overseer has established for me. That is kind of terrifying the more you think about it. And I love that there's this subtlety going on in this story. So yeah, I've just been really enjoying it. I've been enjoying The Wandering Inn. I've been really enjoying the community. It's another reason that I wanted to make this my first proper book review video, is that the community is so fantastic and so friendly and so welcoming. I've seen a couple of critical reviews of The Wandering Inn online, and even those, the community and Pirate Abba and her team seem to be quite positive about that too. There's a real welcoming sense here that made this review one of the easier ones to think about doing as my channel grows from its absolute infancy. It is everything fantasy, is another way of putting it. There is adventure, there is coziness, there is some really pretty grim horror and battle and action sequences. And I have been having a blast. And I will be continuing with it until the end, however many years it takes me. If you have read The Wandering Inn, please hang around, please talk to me about it. If there are similar series, whether it's a web serial or a lit RPG, or just something you think I might enjoy based on this video, by all means recommend it to me. I'm really looking for new stuff always to get to grips in. But in the meantime, thank you so much for listening. And that is what I have to say. See you next time.